The Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, is with us. He was with us last week when he was sporting a shiner. It looks a lot better.
It's cleared up remarkably fast,
Yeah.
and I managed to get through the weekend without getting punched in the face during a football game, so that was a bonus.
Did you win?
Well, last week we won, yes, that's right.
Okay.
It was worth the punch for the win.
Good, excellent. The Home Office has announced it's pausing its decisions on Syrian asylum claims for now. Are they right to do that?
Yes, they are. I called on that yesterday, and a few hours later the government paused the processing, as you say, following other countries, including Germany and Austria. Many of these asylum claims are based on the threat posed by former President Assad. He is clearly no longer there. The circumstances have changed, so it's right the processing stops. And, of course, if Syria becomes safe, then it would be reasonable to ask people to return there. Many Syrians actually themselves are voluntarily returning to Syria from neighbouring countries like Turkey and Lebanon, but certainly for now it's right the processing has paused.
And what about HTS, the acronym that I can't seem to get right this morning? They are at the moment in charge in Syria. They're a terrorist organisation according to the UK government. What should happen? Well,
again, a very fluid situation. I don't think the government should rush into anything. They should just take their time to see how the facts on the ground unfold and see how HTS conduct themselves. We saw the government in complete confusion yesterday. I think Pat McFadden was on TV, I think possibly speaking to you yesterday morning. Definitely speaking to you. He was saying one thing, and then Keir Starmer and David Lammy said another thing. Later in the day, Yvette Cooper was announcing the suspension of asylum processing, while David Lammy, at the same time in the House of Commons, said the exact opposite. So the British government, the Labour government, I'm afraid, were in a bit of chaos yesterday.
OK, but the answer is that they should wait.
Yeah, they should.
But if they wait, they can't talk to a terror organisation, so who do they talk to in Syria?
Well, as I say, I think it's important not to rush into anything. It's important just to wait and see what happens on the ground, see who ends up in control of Syria. There are multiple different groups. I mean, HTS is one of them. They've just gone into Damascus. There are many other groups in Syria as well, and let's see how HTS actually now conduct themselves. And I don't think the government should rush into a decision at the moment. Let's just see what happens.
Do you have praise for the deal that was done with the Germans, making migrant smuggling to the UK a specific criminal offence? That was signed yesterday.
Well, look, it certainly won't do any harm, but it would be very naive to assume that this will fix the problem, because the National Crime Agency themselves have said you need a deterrent to stop small boats crossing the Channel. And, of course, we had a deterrent, the Rwanda scheme, which the Labour government cancelled before it even started. And as a result of that, Channel crossings this year are 18%, since the election, are 18% higher compared to the same period last year. So since the election, an 18% year-on-year increase because they scrapped the deterrent. We've seen deterrents work elsewhere in Australia, for example, so Labour were wrong to do that. They've also got a bit of a cheek trumpeting this when it was Labour in opposition who voted against the bill, the Nationality and Borders Act, which contained life sentences for people smuggling gangs, the gangs they now claim they want to smash.
Yeah, you keep banging on about the deterrent, but, you know, you didn't send anybody to Rwanda, and you're going to say the flights would have gone, but they didn't.
The first flight was due to take off on the 24th of July, but Labour cancelled it, and that was a mistake.
Yeah, OK. We'll never know now, will we? Obviously, if they are seizing the boats in Germany that are being transitioned through Germany or stored in Germany by these smuggling gangs, then that is a deterrent.
Well, I mean, it might help at the margins disrupt people smugglers, but as the national,
boats, they can't get across the channel.
But as the National Crime Agency said, you know, you take out one criminal gang, another one pops up in its place, and that's why you need a systemic deterrent, like, for example, ensuring that people who come across the channel illegally get rapidly sent to somewhere like Rwanda. We saw that work in Australia about 10 years ago. Their programme was called Operation Sovereign Borders, and the Australians had a similar problem to the one that we've got. Operation Sovereign Borders over there involved sending people to Nauru, which is an island in the Pacific, rather than Rwanda, but the principle was the same, and it very rapidly completely stopped those, what they called illegal maritime arrivals that were going from Indonesia across to Australia.
I believe it was a pretty brutal system at the time.
But it saved lives. There were hundreds of people were dying making that crossing, and in fact I think over 50 people have died in the last 18 months here. And after Australia implemented that scheme, the number of maritime deaths went down to zero. So it actually saved lives.
OK, former Lord Chief Justice Lord Thomas has said that ministers should consider abandoning some jury trials under the justice system until it's properly funded because of the backlog up to 100,000 cases. If you were Home Secretary today, what would you do?
Well, of course, that's up to the Justice Secretary rather than the Home Secretary.
I'm sure you have a view.
And jury trial. Well, I think jury trials are a really important part of our justice system. You know, the right to be tried by your peers goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. I think one thing you could look at doing is taking some criminal offences which are triable either way. That means the defendant can choose whether to have a magistrates' court trial or a Crown Court trial. You could take some of those less serious offences and make them summary only, meaning they get tried in the magistrates' court, and the defendant might get a lower sentence as a result. So there's some fine-tuning like that you could do, but I think we shouldn't be undermining jury trials. They're a fundamental part of our civil liberties, and I think people would be very worried if the right to jury trial was significantly undermined.
Or a middle ground, suggestions of an intermediate court between magistrates and Crown Court.
But that would also involve removing juries, because the so-called intermediate court would have a district judge sitting with two magistrates. Yes. So that would still entail the removal of a jury. And I do think that the right to jury trial is one of those ancient rights that we have as free citizens of this country going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And I don't think undermining that fundamental liberty is the right thing to do just to try and expedite the progress of cases through the Crown Court. And what the government should do is perhaps fund additional Crown Court sitting days. I know the last government removed the cap on sitting days so that the Crown Court could sit as many days as there were judges available. And I think that the sitting days have now been capped by the new government for financial reasons, and I think that is probably a mistake.
That's your fault. Do you agree with Pat McFadden when he says the civil service should think more like a start-up?
I do think the civil service should be a bit more dynamic and think more like a start-up. For example, people are very rarely dismissed for poor performance, and conversely, those who perform really well don't tend to get rewarded financially as much as they should do or would do in the private sector. Equally, I think promotion can be quite slow, and the culture. I've got a lot of respect for the civil service in some ways, but so the culture can be quite risk-averse, and often the objective is just to sort of avoid rocking the boat. So I think a bit of a start-up culture would be a good idea, but saying it is a lot easier than actually doing it. Now, we had some plans to reduce the size of the civil service in order to make it more efficient, to save some money that could then be handed back to the British public in the form of tax cuts or indeed spent on frontline services. And as far as I'm aware, the new government has scrapped the plans to reduce the size of the civil service, which grew quite a lot during the COVID pandemic, and I think it could be just reduced back down a bit to the size it was, say, in 2016.
Angela Eagle, the Home Office Minister, was talking rubbish this morning. When I say that, I mean they were talking about when the rubbish collections should be. It was, a lot of people, it's 2 weeks, because local government doesn't have, and councils don't have enough money, that might stretch to a month. Thoughts on that?
I think a month is far too long. You can't have rubbish hanging around outside your house for a month. It'll rot, the foxes will get at it, it'll start smelling. I think that is a terrible idea. We're paying... The Labour government just slapped us with £40 billion worth of tax rises. Tax rises they essentially lied about during the election. They told us they had no plans to significantly increase taxes. So to slap us with £40 billion of tax rises and then tell us that they don't want to collect the rubbish on a sensible basis every week or two, I think is absolutely outrageous. So she was talking rubbish literally as well as metaphorically. OK.
Is that an Oura ring that you've got?
It is an Oura ring,
okay.
Yeah.
Do you find it's very... I've got one too. Do you find it very useful?
So I look at it first thing when I wake up, and I found out this morning I'd only had about 4.5 hours sleep. So one person I spoke to about this said actually it ends up making you more stressed because you end up obsessing about how much sleep you've had and what your readiness score is and all that kind of thing. But I quite like numbers, so I have a good look every morning and see how my sleep's gone. How many hours sleep did you get?
I hardly get any sleep. It keeps telling me that I need more sleep. My producer's asking me what an Oura ring is. It's basically, it tells you whether you're living your life properly or not.
Yeah, and it tracks sleep, it tracks your heart rate.
It does, and it says whether or not you're stressed.
Yeah.
Well, you can check, can't you?
I'll check afterwards. Probably, I don't know. I'm not that stressed.
No, I'm not stressed at all.
Good.
It's good to see you, as
you
always.
too.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.